I would suggest this to any owner, even a homeowner. If you're unsure of what you're looking at, that's what you have an insurance agent or a broker for. Use them. All of us should be offering this service because we're selling you the policies. We're here to protect you, and you shouldn't have to understand insurance to operate your business. That's what you have professionals for.
Welcome back to this week's episode of the Lady Landlords podcast. I am your host, Becky Nova, and today we have a very special guest. We have Elena Jesse here from Don Girelli Associates. We're going to be talking about some insurance. We're going to be talking about what we need to be able to do to protect ourselves as landlords. So, Elena, thank you so much for being here today. How you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, Becky.
Good. Well, I appreciate your time coming on. So for our listeners out there, Elena is actually one of my softball buddies, but it's really great that I get to mix two of my loves, softball and real estate, all in one place. So I'm so happy to introduce you guys to Elena. But Elena, why don't you just kind of kick us off here? Just kind of share with our listeners just a little bit about who you, the woman Elena, is behind the insurance industry.
Proud to do that. Well, Becky, I'm very proud to be included in Becky's founded Lady Landlord Association. I'm Elena Jesse from Don Girelli Associates Insurance Agency, and I'm from a small town in upstate New York. And as a young adult, I was working various jobs, as we all do, and I was very lucky to retire from the food service industry at age 21. At that time, I actually responded to a bookkeeping ad at an insurance agency, which was really funny because I never even balanced my own checkbook. While I was there, though, I became very good friends with an older gentleman who really mentored me and suggested at that point that I should get my insurance license, which I did. And I'm glad that I did because it was a very short period of time after that where he opened up another office that was specializing in condominium co-op and homeowners associations. And he asked me to join the team to head off the collaborative team in building a strong book of business for business insurance and personal lines. So from there, I became the leader of just such a wonderful group of individuals, and we were very, very successful. I'm married. I have a 22-year-old daughter who just graduated college, and she's getting ready for grad school, which we are extremely excited about. I have 3 dogs who are really my other 3 kids. Of course, I love softball. All outdoor activities. I love camping, which is really glamping. The interesting thing is, though, because I live and work in the same community, I'm just very, very community-based. And from there, a lot of the things that I enjoy doing, I get to do, and I get to do them while I'm helping others and just being part of a larger community. So it's very rewarding for me.
Right.
And then, of course, because my daughter plays hockey, I am a huge hockey fan, mostly college hockey, but I enjoy very much professional hockey as well.
I'm so glad you mentioned that about Riley, because if you didn't, I was going to. So Elena here is the absolute hockey mom. She went to every game of her daughter's college career, which was just really cool. Home and away games. So that's really just cool commitment. But I've met Riley. She's awesome. I wish her the best now that she's graduating. But really, that hockey mom, that had to have been very interesting to balance your professional career and also being a supportive mom. What tip maybe do you have about how to kind of balance that world? Because you work consistently and still never miss games.
I would like to say it's a challenge, but it's not. And with technology being the way that it is, we pretty much can work anywhere, unless you have to be on site, which with Zoom, with email, with all the technology that we have, it's kind of easy. I do write a lot of insurance while I'm driving in hotels, but I think since COVID, a lot of the world kind of changed the way that business is done. And it really kind of made it easy for me, especially in the college years, because it's also a busy time for the insurance industry and even the real estate industry for the past 3-4 years. And it's been forever changing. So I think that because of the changes in how we are working, it made it a little bit easier. But
it's also a lot of driving was involved in that. But it's really interesting now how we can work from our cars in capacities that are safe to still be able to do that. So I love that you were able to make that fit and really kind of have that balance between kind of work and life. When you got into the insurance industry, which was just a very niche place in the world here, and also the specific types of insurance that you really focus on. What would you say was the biggest like learning curve you had into understanding the insurance industry?
That's a very good question, Becky. I think the most challenging obstacle was actually people. Insurance Insurance is actually about building relationships. I wouldn't say that that's necessarily a challenge for me, but it's a learning experience because you have to learn different people's personalities. What works for one does not necessarily work for the other. The way that we operate our office is, I mean, obviously, we do a lot of community associations, so we have very large accounts. However, we could have someone come in and we write a $200 motorcycle policy and they get the very exact same treatment. So it's really just understanding and learning people, being able to identify what their needs and their values are right from the start. I think that was the biggest challenge. The insurance part, that's always, I mean, the forms are the forms, the coverage is the coverage. Creating an environment and a platform for consumers to understand what the coverages mean,
Mhm.
that probably would be a secondary challenge. Just bringing the terms into English where most people can understand.
Right, I was gonna say really translating like English to English, I feel like it's like half the job of what's needed in insurance and a lot of other industries. I like that you said that about people because I feel like as real estate investors, that's also what we have to look for. We have to understand our tenants, our personalities, our needs, what they're looking for. Same thing if we're looking to purchase a property. What does the seller really want out of this deal? What are they looking to get out of those things? So there's a lot of it's also a lot of networking. So there's
Yeah.
a lot of those things that really need to be done kind of in both industries. So when we think of insurance, and once again, a person that's outside of the industry, I feel like I see like this medical insurance, right? We all need to have, make sure that when I go to a doctor, that like that visit's covered, or at least isn't going to literally cost me an arm and a leg to go see somebody. But then
Right.
you also have like your auto insurance, you have house insurance, but then I also have like life insurance, right? What is your specific sector within all of those different types of insurance?
We we write all lines of insurance with the exception of health insurance. We think that there are professionals that specialize in health insurance and they do a very good job at it. And we ourselves have health insurance plans, and we go to an we write all property and casualty, whether it's literally property or casualty, which would be general liability, auto, home, boats, RVs, motorcycles, apartment buildings, condominium associations, and any kind of business insurance. So that is generally what most insurance agencies do. There are some
Mhm.
large hubs that have, hundreds of employees that will have a benefits division. We're just not that. We like the professionals to stick to that.
Right, I think experts should be the experts in their
Yes,
space, right? That's that whole idea of jack of all trades, master of none, right? It's important
exactly.
to really understand, and we do the same thing as real estate investors. We need to really get very focused and very clear on what it is that we are looking to accomplish, and then you stay in your lane. So I'm happy
Exactly.
that you guys also do that. With that, you said a word in there that I hear often, broker. So I feel
Uh-huh.
like you hear broker, insurance broker, you hear insurance agent.
Mhm.
What's the difference? Is there any difference?
That's a really good question. The difference is the loyalty and who we as insurance professionals are responsible for answering to. A broker ideally is for the client,
Mhm.
meaning anyone that's coming into the office, and an agent typically is a representation of the insurance carrier. Now, that being said, in most instances, and almost every instance of my capacity of doing business, I'm both. I'm obligated to have a duty to both, which becomes, some people think that it could become tricky, but it's not, because if you're a good person, you have good intentions and you're doing things the right way, everything
Mhm.
that you're doing as an insurance professional should be beneficial and honest to the insurance company and beneficial and honest to the consumer.
So it sounds very similar to me in relationship to like a mortgage lender and a mortgage broker, right? So if I go to a mortgage lender, that's kind of like that agent, right? Where they're usually representing a specific company. They might, for example, with the mortgage lender, they work for Chase. They can give me
Correct.
Chase products or nobody else's products, right? Compared to if I go to a mortgage broker, where then they could put me with Fifth Third Bank, they could put me with Truist, they could put me with Bank of America, whatever it may be. And then they also have that dual responsibility to not only those specific banking institutions, but then also us as clients. And it sounds like really as an insurance broker, it's that same kind of duality that you also face as well.
It's 100% exactly correct. And an interesting point on that statement that you just said, the banking industry and the insurance industry are governed and oversaw by the same division. So we really have the same exact governing agency and responsibilities.
Okay, we are still coming back to that in a few minutes. But speaking then in terms of our community as lady landlords, what types of insurance do I need to make sure to have as a real estate investor?
Well, there are two ways to answer that question. There's the investment side, meaning, are you managing properties? Are you managing properties for others? And then there's the owning side of, well, you need protection for the buildings, you need protection for the premises liability. You need to explore considerations for extra layers of liability. Do you have cover? Do you have staff? Do you have employment practice liability coverage? Do you have workers' comp insurance? There are a lot of products out there that protect you. You know, no one reads their insurance policies, but I always refer to it as like bathtub reading. You know, yeah, I'm going to read what it covers. But the point of an insurance contract is exactly that. It's a contract. So it's going to offer you coverages. It's going to display coverages, and then it'll allow you to buy back coverages. The buyback coverages aren't always everything that one needs. So there are a lot of different ways to answer that question. I hope that kind of covers a few points on it.
No, that gives us a nice big umbrella here. Let's break this then down. Let's start with the owning property, okay? Because all of our lady landlords, that's the goal here, is we're going to own those properties. So now I go and I buy property. And before I'm able to close on a property, I'm always asked, make sure that you have to bind your insurance coverage and you have to have that. So then that becomes kind of that conundrum of homeowners insurance policy versus landlord policy. What is the difference? How do I figure out which I need?
Well, one of the questions that come up very often in my office, especially with investors that are buying multiple properties or they're buying them in their personal name versus an LLC, a lot of it, it's kind of a tricky question, Becky. A lot of it depends on the loan. There are different types of loans out there, and this would be more of information that you would be able to tell me. And what I find with various clients is they're getting a personal loan where it's considered on the loaning industry to be an owner occupied, but in the end, it's either vacant or it's going to be going under renovation, and then it's going to be occupied by a tenant. The insurance is the insurance. The bank is the bank. The most important thing I could communicate with where I'm about to go now is to have open communications and do things properly.
Yes.
Not get a landlord policy or a homeowner's policy on a vacant building anywhere. So the difference between a landlord and a homeowner's policy, one is owner occupied, a homeowner's policy is owner occupied. You could also have a two-family that's owner occupied and part of it's rented, and that's okay. Many insurers will insure it that way as well, where you'll still have your loss of use in the event that there's a claim where your tenant has to be displaced. It'll cover the building, and then it'll cover your personal belongings as well. And the most important part is the liability. But as for a landlord, the questions are a little bit different. You're not, as a landlord policy owner or insurer, you wouldn't be responsible necessarily for any contents unless you had business personal property that was on the property to maintain. It's really just the structure and the premises liability.
Right. So if I'm living in the property, homeowners insurance, it sounds like, is going to really be what's going to cover me, right? And we're going to come back to homeowners insurance policies in a second. So really, if it's clearly my primary home, I'm looking for the homeowners insurance policy. If I am house hacking, as we call it in our industry, where we own a multifamily, rent out one side, live in the other side, then it also sounds like the homeowner's insurance policy is going to be the right fit. Compared to if it was purely an investment property, I'm not living there, my stuff isn't there, it's just being rented out to strangers, then really that landlord policy is going to come into play. Now, with those, and we want to break that down in a second here, but let's say I bought that multifamily and I had a homeowner's insurance policy on it because I lived in one side of the duplex, rented out the other side. But now I bought a new property. I moved somewhere else. And now that two family is a complete investment property. Do I need to change that to a landlord policy?
100% you do.
Say that
And you do not
again.
want to
Say
find,
that
you do not
again.
want to find out that you need to do that after a claim.
Right. We need to be switching those to now a landlord policy. Also, let's take another scenario with that. I bought that property to move into. I live in one side, my tenant lives in the other side. But I decided to have that property owned by an LLC. So it's not owned by Becky, but it's owned by Becky's Properties LLC. Well, should that still be should the insurance policy still be in my name as a homeowner's insurance policy? Because now it's owned by a corporation.
Most insurers at this point, just because an LLC is a very common protective layer for investment professionals. So it's kind of the industry is kind of caught up to it. And what can happen is you can write it under Becky's name and then add the LLC as an additional named insured. This way, in the event of a lawsuit, you get the lawsuit, it's going to go under the LLC's name. The LLC has the protection, and then you as Becky, the homeowner, also has personal liability protection as well.
Exactly. Because with the house hack, and now let's kind of talk a little bit more about that homeowner's insurance policy there for a second. So this house hacking idea is very, very popular. It's a great way to get started in real estate investing. It's how I got started in real estate investing. So let's say that I'm living in the one side, I have tenants in the other side, I have my homeowner's insurance policy because I'm living in the property. My items are protected in the house. My jewelry, my clothes, my belongings, my flat screen TV, right? But are my tenants' items protected if anything happens?
Never. The tenant, and I'm sure that you have an ironclad lease that goes through the insurance needs for your tenant. And part of that lease will say that they need to have liability insurance and insurance for their personal belongings. There is not a reason, unless you personally stole from your tenants, that you would ever be responsible for any of their belongings. And this is regardless of an incident that could happen. I mean, just think about what can happen to your personal belongings. Someone can rob you. Okay, that liable for that as a landlord. There could be a fire, whether it's electrical or a kitchen fire. You're still not responsible for that. There could be a hurricane can come and blow the roof off, and there could be water damage. Becky's still not responsible for the tenant's belongings.
I'm liking the sound of this, but most tenants are not going to understand that, right? Most tenants automatically, we hear this all the time. Oh, a tree fell in the driveway and hit my car. These are just complete examples I see probably on a weekly basis within Lady.
That happens a lot.
Right, right. A tree falls, hits, lands on car, it's in the driveway of the rental property, tenant calls landlord, right? Maybe not as often, but there was a robbery, right? And it was in the tenant side over there. There is the refrigerator that goes out. And we were talking about this in the Lady Landlord's Inner Circle the other day, that the fridge always breaks the day after the tenant does the biggest shopping, right? Where they spend hundreds of dollars. It always breaks exactly after that. And then the first thing that always happens is that the tenant's calling saying, hey, I need money for this. You got to replace this. My things were damaged, stolen, went bad, whatever it is. But so what you're saying is that I, as a landlord, my homeowner's insurance policy is not covering any of those items.
Not at all. Your landlord policy or your homeowner's policy in that instance. Think about it this way. You're a homeowner. If your refrigerator breaks down, is someone else responsible for it? Are you calling GE? Are they going to now be responsible? No. So it works the same way. It works the same exact way. I mean, the responsible thing to do, and just following your group on social media, the refrigerator one is one that comes up all the time.
Yes.
This is what coolers are for. You need to protect your interest. You're right too. It always happens after the largest shopping trip of the year, for that matter, and it's usually in July. Still their responsibility. They should protect their goods. They should knock on the neighbor's door. They should, if it's a duplex, they should knock on your door and say, hey, do you mind if I put some stuff in your fridge? If they felt like they just spent $1,000 on groceries and they wanted to report it to their renter's insurance, they could do that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they still have a deductible, so it all depends on the deductible for that line item. Some renters policies have sublimits for items like refrigerated items where it's a reduction from the standard property deductible. In this market where we're at today, more than likely not.
We're going to talk about that in a second too. So really my response as a landlord in those scenarios that we were really given was, sorry, those things are not covered. Those are not landlord liabilities. Please refer to your renter's insurance policy in those situations, right? And
Correct.
that's something we talk about in Lady Landlords very often, is that idea of actually requiring renter's insurance for tenants, right?
Mhm.
Some landlords do this, some landlords do not. Once again, personal choice within landlording. But it's very nice to be able to go back and have that conversation really upfront with the tenant, saying, hey, by the way, just so you're aware, these things, your property is not covered, and have that conversation and move in, which is why
Right.
we're requiring you to have renter's insurance, which is really us helping them adults in a lot of ways, right? But then being able to refer back to them to that way when those situations do happen, well, that was the whole point of having insurance. Now, to my understanding, renter's insurance is rather affordable still these days, especially in the light of other insurance, but renter's insurance is still affordable, would you say?
Extremely affordable. Depending on the value and a value of the contents, which would be in the taste of, people's furniture and whatnot. In most cases in New York State, it's under $300 a year. And I'm
Wow.
probably adding an extra 100 just to consider the higher valued of items in downstate New York.
Right, exactly. Talking like more like city area, right? And then when it comes to like, if I'm going to require my tenants to have renter's insurance, I don't need to dictate an actual amount. That's really the amount that the tenant feels that their property is really worth, right? It shouldn't be related to what the house is worth or the space is worth. There's no correlation there, correct?
There is no correlation there at all. But the one thing that you can require contractually is a minimum limit of liability. I
Okay.
usually suggest to landlords in my office at least 300,000. It gives a good layer of liability in the event that the claim ends up hitting your insurance,
Mhm.
where it gives enough of a bumper there.
What do you mean by the renter's claim hitting my insurance? Can you give me an example of a scenario of that?
I'm over at your house and I slip and fall and I break my leg.
Mhm.
You have renter's insurance, but you only have $100,000 of
Oh.
liability coverage. Well, I sue you as the tenant
Mhm.
and I get my $100,000, but because I took it to court, my
Mhm.
damage was 300,000. Where's that other 200,000 going to come from? The landlord policy is going to pick up that additional 200,000.
Actually, the most exciting thing that you said about there was that that guest went after the tenant first and not just me originally. I
That's
really
only if
actually
it
like
was
that.
inside the space. If it was
Inside the
inside,
state,
yes.
right,
Now, if sidewalk, it would be a whole other scenario
correct.
unless the lease stipulates that the tenant is responsible for slip and falls on the sidewalk, which you generally see that more in commercial lines than you do in a landlord tenant situation, but I've seen it happen.
Right, and you're also not gonna see that in like a multifamily situation, right?
Right,
Because if you have multiple tenants in a building, you're not gonna be
right.
able, everybody's not gonna be like 4 people aren't responsible for the
Look up
same
the square
sidewalk. Right.
footage.
But and then, oh no, well, he was on the next crack, so that's no, that's responsibility for tenant 2, not tenant 1. But that's really interesting too, that like there is the tenant responsibility for their guests on that property, and that it's not always just go after the landlord. So I do like the idea, and thank you very much for giving us in a roundabout, kind of number, because that's a question we get often is just like, well, great, I'm going to require them to have insurance, but what does that really mean? Cool, they get, a policy that's going to cover, 50K. Now all of a sudden they're out more than that, then what happens? So I love the idea of actually having that recommendation there. So now I'm a landlord. I decide I'm going to require that. I'm going to go with your recommended number here. Well, how do I know that the tenant actually got the policy and actually has an active policy?
Most insurers allow evidence of coverage to go out to the landlord as part of the
Mhm.
contract. They could either be added on as an additional insured. Otherwise, they just do it as it's kind of like a mortgagee notification, but in a landlord tenant situation, it's a landlord notice. But once you get the original evidence of coverage, even if it's in the form of a declaration page or a certificate of insurance, These are things you're going to be having in your little notes to check up on each year. If you don't get a cancellation or if you don't get the evidence of coverage automatically, hey, Susan, just wanted to get your farmer's insurance renewal policy. I need to make sure that you have that liability. And
Right.
it's really up to the landlord at this time to be collecting certificates of insurance annually.
Right, and that's gonna be also incredibly important when we are making sure that they are adhering to the lease. So, and
Yeah.
just like our mortgage companies are getting notification of our insurance renewals, our insurance cancellation changes, whatever those may be, they get that notice that lets them know that. And your mortgage company will absolutely reach out to you if they get a notification saying, hey, this policy is gonna be canceled or is in arrears, whatever that may look like. So we as
Yep.
landlords are entitled to the exact same thing. So I love
Absolutely.
that. In that situation though, let's say that one of my units, let's take this a little more drastic than just, the refrigerator, going out here. Let's say the unit is damaged. We're in New York. This happened a couple of years ago. Hurricane came through, apartments were flooded, apartments were damaged. People weren't able to live in those properties. Well, am I the one responsible for paying to put them in a hotel and pay for their meals and maybe what their different commute to work would be? Or is renter's insurance also going to cover that? Does that come to me as the landlord or is that still on tenant?
It's still on the tenant. Part of their policy, which it actually works the same in your homeowner's policy too. In your homeowner's policy or landlord policy, you have what's called loss of rental income. So in the event that that does happen and your tenant's displaced and they have to stay somewhere else, they're not going to be paying you rent. So you need your money to make yourself whole as well. The tenant has what's called loss of use, and the loss of use pays for them to stay somewhere of equal value, maintaining their current lifestyle
Mhm,
somewhere else. And then this could be a hotel, this could be renting another space, depending on the situation. And
mhm.
it's part of their contract as well. And very often, I've had a large fire across the river before where a whole building got burnt down and 16 families were displaced. And it was a condo building. So
Wow.
what you have to factor in is the amount of coverage versus where you're living, because the building has to go through the rebuild has to go through the building department, has to go through the property manager, the general contractor, and you don't know how long it's going to take to rebuild that building. And what I saw is a lot of people had very minimum limits of loss of use and contents for that matter. And the insurance carriers were just writing a check and saying, and 18 months later, they
Right.
still didn't have a place to live and they had no money. And it's because they
Wow.
didn't have enough insurance.
Well, I can see why people would do that. One, I don't think, everybody really has a great insurance agent like yourself to really kind of break this down and go through things so clearly and really make sure that I am properly covered. But also, there are women that are listening to this episode right now that are in states that have just seen massive increases in their insurance policies. One, we've been thinking as lady landlords for the past couple of years that the interest rates that we've been seeing have been making or breaking deals for us. So this is not going to cash flow because of just how high these interest rates are. But now we're seeing that, and now I was working with a client from our inner circle yesterday, and she was saying that really the factor that's breaking most of her deals down in Florida is actually the high rate of insurance costs. So I feel like we're seeing a trend with more and more people, especially kind of your mom and pop landlords, are really taking the least amount of insurance coverage as they really can and just crossing their fingers and toes. Is this something that you're seeing on your side as well, where people are really kind of bucking at the prices that they're seeing for insurance coverage and for adequate insurance coverage?
It's kind of, I just want to take it a few steps back. It's to answer this question because it's kind of twofold. What's happening in the insurance industry right now? You just mentioned inflation. So
Mhm.
inflation has a trickling effect on insurance. So we also have the unfortunately, no one still wants to talk about this, but we have the effects from COVID. So what happened with that is we now have skilled labor shortages. We now have valuations for building materials that have skyrocketed. We
Mhm.
have property rates that were really priced improperly for years and years. And then we have these wonderful storms that are flying in, and we have these catastrophic losses. So, what's happening with the insurance is the companies have to buy insurance. Those rates have gone up because of the items that I just mentioned. And what happens with that is the insurance carriers pass on that rise of cost to us, the consumer. So we have that one reason for insurance rates to be increasing. And then we also have the building valuations just going up. I mean, if you've had a renewal lately on a building policy, sometimes it's 20 to 30 to 40% higher than what it was last year. And it's because they're adjusting the valuations. Are people trying to reduce the property coverage? Yeah, they are. And what that's doing is, or what it could do if an agent allows them to do it, it puts them in a financial situation where if there is a fire and the building is completely destroyed, they're not going to have enough money to rebuild. It's very dangerous. Are there products out there that can accommodate that? Yes. Do I recommend? No. I recommend kind of reanalyzing and revisiting everything in a whole, your insurance, all other factors that contribute to the cost for owning a building and seeing where things can be changed. Maybe
Yeah.
reach out to your agent and say, can we find a different carrier? There are ways to fix that rather than underinsuring. And most carriers right now won't allow an insured to purchase a policy that's under 100% replacement cost.
Really?
Mhm.
That's an interesting trend to be seeing. I like that idea. And personally, like that's what I've done with like my insurance is to make sure to have that 100% replacement cost. Like I actually really kind of like that benefit. I understand I'm paying more for that. Well, then that comes to kind of my next question here. I feel like whenever a situation happens, there always becomes this debate of this situation happened, it cost me this money. Do I turn it into my insurance company or do I not? What suggestions or maybe where is kind of that line of where you feel that people should be turning claims in versus where people should just be paying it out of pocket, not even telling the insurance company because of the impact that may have moving forward?
It's a question that I'm asked, I think, every single day. Just kind of going back to the last topic, we're in what's called a hard market. And with a hard market, what happens is that insurers start pulling out of territories and even states. They non-renew or will not offer new business policies for certain types of risk. They are extremely, extremely picky when it comes to how many claims you're allowed to have.
Hmm.
And then keep in mind, there's a look back on property policies, and it varies from state to state. But in New York, it varies from anywhere from 3 to 5 years.
Hmm.
The reason why I'm giving you all that context is because there's really no right answer, except do not use your insurance as a maintenance program. That's the best advice that I can give. There is no magic number of what the threshold should be for making a decision of putting in a claim because people's personal finances are exactly that. They're personal.
Right.
Um, some people have, $100,000 in the bank where if they have a $10,000 claim, then they're just gonna, I'm fixing this. I'm not getting my insurance involved. But God
Right.
forbid there's a house fire. That's an entirely different scenario. The one thing I would be very weary of is water damage. When there's any water damage, especially if it's on a second story that goes down to the first story, or even the first story, depending on where the water damage is, sometimes you may want to get the insurance carrier involved because in New York, and I'm only speaking for the state of New York, the only way that mold would be covered is if it's following a claim, a water incident claim.
Ah, okay.
Keep in mind, insurance is sudden and accidental. So if you just have mold growing anywhere in your home, that's not sudden and accidental. So there's never going to be coverage, with one exception, if it's a result from a water damage claim. So those are things you definitely want to speak to your contractor about, speak to your agent about, kind of know who's doing any kind of cleanup and if it's being done properly to see if you really should consider getting your insurance carrier involved or even putting them on notice.
Right. That's really interesting. I like the idea too of mentioning, mold clearly does not grow
Right.
overnight here. It really is something that takes time, and especially, black mold, hazardous mold is a very different, it's an organism. So yes, you cannot
Yeah.
just turn around and be like, oh, I didn't know about this mold over here, when clearly it must have been a problem for quite some time. So that's really interesting to see about how that would come from water. So those are really great things to take into consideration. What is working with a lot of landlords as you do with co-ops, apartments, things like that, what is one of like the biggest mistakes that you feel like you're seeing landlords making? Like when a new client comes to you, they're saying, hey, I have these rental properties. Can you look through my insurance, make sure I'm covered? What's the one thing that you're always like, people just always miss?
I really want to answer this question in the reverse.
Okay.
Because there isn't a specific answer to that, but what I want to do is I want to explain what I like to see and what makes a good investor. Most of you ladies that are going to be watching this podcast are savvy investors, and you're probably already doing this. Make sure that you have annual leases. Insurance carriers are asking, and it's a requirement. Most of you have them because it's for your protection as well. Make sure that that lease remains annual. Make sure that there's systems in place for tracking renters insurance. Make sure that you have risk transfer in your portfolio so you have liability insurance as a primary layer for the tenant. Do not put in small claims. Do not hire uninsured contractors. That's a big one. It's especially big in New York State. You want to make sure that there's a contract in place. We have a whole risk management program within our office for our condominiums, cooperative apartments, HOAs, as well as for our homeowners and business insurance, to make sure that we're reviewing insurance coverages with the contractors to make sure they have the proper coverage in the event that they mess things up. It happens.
I'm going to jump in here for a second and interrupt you. Talking about contractors, you're saying make sure to be able to use people that are insured, right?
Mhm.
Great. Hey, Mr. Painter Man, are you insured? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, great. Come on in and paint. Bring all your ladders inside my rental property. How do I make sure that they really are insured and insured properly?
Well, you know how you collect the evidence of insurance from your tenants?
Mm-hmm.
You ask the same thing from the contractor. It's industry standard to provide a certificate of insurance naming the owner of the building as an additional insured. You want to be sure that there's a waiver of subrogation, so we have no contractual issues there. And two important coverages you want to look for: general liability and workers' comp.
Mm-hmm.
In New York State, it's interesting that you're talking about ladders. There's what's called New York State scaffolding law. And it's known as a New York labor law. It's a heights exclusion or inclusion on New York State insurance policies for contractors. You want to make sure they have that coverage if they're on a ladder, because in New York State, you as the homeowner or property owner could be responsible in the event that someone fell off of a roof or off of a ladder and was seriously injured, and you could be dragged into a lawsuit.
I'm actually going to take that a step further here, Elena. The reason for that is because, and this happens in other places in the world, but especially in New York, but where I own some rental properties in Yonkers, New York, you're really thinking like those old school, like row houses, kind of what you would see back in like the movies, right? And they're houses that are very close together. Well, our neighbor, not us, our neighbor was doing work on the exterior of their house. But since it was so close to our property, because it's one property to the next, the ladders and scaffolding had to be put on our property. I come home, I find these people in my driveway with their ladders, with their scaffolding, and I was like, one, excuse me, you are on my property. Let's first discuss that. Two, I need to see that you are insured. Because even though you were hired by my neighbors, which actually was also a rental property, by the way, but even though they hired you, they're paying for you, they probably did not, but they may have checked and asked if you were insured. You are now on my property, and therefore, if you fell off your ladder, your scaffolding, I am the one that's responsible. So even though I did not hire them, I needed to see that they were insured also in that case.
100%. And your neighbor really should have taken care of that. I've advised you that this work was taking place, considering there's such a small barrier between the buildings. And this happens a lot. It happens with tree work, even in rural areas. Sometimes you have to encroach on other people's property to get where you need to be.
Right.
But because it's scaffolding, which is exactly about New York labor law, I mean, that's what the law is all about. You definitely are entitled to a certificate of insurance listing you as additional insured and making sure that there's a waiver of subrogation. And what I would always do, I would suggest this to any owner, even a homeowner. If you're unsure of what you're looking at, that's what you have an insurance agent or a broker for. Use them. All of us should be offering this service because we're selling you the policies. We're here to protect you, and you shouldn't have to understand insurance to operate your business. That's what you have professionals for.
When I'm interviewing insurance agents or brokers, how do I know if it's a good person, a bad person, that they're the person I should go with? What makes a good agent?
I think a lot of it is gut. Do they know what it is that they're talking about? Are you able to communicate with them? Do you trust them? So these people are, I mean, we're licensed. So, well, we should all be licensed anyways to
Right.
be selling insurance. If that should be a question to ask. It's a feeling, what do other people say? Read reviews,
Right.
check out their websites, see how many years have they been in business? Do they have a team of people that can help if someone gets sick? There's really no magic wand or right thing to
Right.
know or ask. It's just really what you feel comfortable with. And do I feel that when my renewals are coming up, are they calling me saying, hey, we have a problem? Or hey, we have something else to offer you. Let's just do a review. Do you have any changes of exposure? Like, they should be doing that for you as owners.
And I feel like that's more than just shopping rates. I feel like you hear that all the time. Like, where can I save like an extra penny? Where am I really getting like the best like rates? But sometimes it's also the service, the person that you get, that also should be kind of a part of those decisions as well. We clearly want great rates. Yes, absolutely. We still want to make sure that like that's clear. But I really think
course.
that like also finding the person, like you said, that's going to call you and say, hey, maybe we can look at this way. Maybe we can bundle this differently. Maybe we can, I feel like having a good person on your side that understands what you're looking to do, it's sometimes more worth kind of the penny pinching.
It really is. And I have a lot of people that will call my office that really are just shopping around, and I very rarely write them. Right or wrong, some people just feel that they need to shop around all the time, but it's just not really in their best interest in most instances, unless they really don't like their broker, or if they're going direct with a carrier where they're dialing a 1-800 number and getting someone, from Texas for their New York policy or
Right.
Colorado for their New Jersey policy. A lot of people don't like that.
Right. I don't blame you. And I think that is really important to find really, and we talk about this in Lady Lemons often, is really trying to find somebody to build these long lasting relationships with, really having those experts on your team, whether they're your realtor, your lender, your insurance broker, all those different people. You really need to spend kind of that time up front, getting to know them, getting to understand the policy, getting to understand that relationship. And when you find somebody great, they're the people that are going to work with you and really point you in the right direction. So I think that's very well said.
They're not always going to have the answer you want to hear, but to have the answer that's practical and safe, that's a whole other story.
Right. Unfortunately, that's usually what we need. So
Yeah.
I love that. Well, Elena, thank you very much for today. I appreciate you coming on the show and just sharing so much information with us. This was a very, very useful episode. Thank you.
I'm very honored to be part of this. Thank you so much for having me, Becky.
Yeah. For all of our listeners out there, I'll make sure to put Elena's information down under the show notes. So feel free to reach out to Elena if you do need support with your insurance needs here in New York. Otherwise, please make sure to hit that subscribe button so you do not miss the next episode of the Lady Landlords podcast. Also, if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review. That helps other women that are looking for support on their real estate investing journey find our podcast and get the help that they need. Thank you so much, and I will see you all back in the Lady Landlords Facebook group.
Thank you for listening to the Lady Landlords podcast. If you're feeling stuck in your real estate investing journey, visit lady-landlord.com to book a 15-minute orientation call with me and see if you're ready to join our mentorship program. Or you can subscribe to our newsletter and join our Facebook group for exclusive real estate investing tips and offers. Invest with confidence. Become a Lady Landlord today.